So what I'm going to do is give about a 20-minute update on the climate science of rising sea level and answer any questions. I'm going to show you a short new video from Greenland from a trip we did there just 2 months ago and put that in perspective. And then I think we're going to try and do something a little more elaborate, a regular program like 45 minutes, and do that in the winter time. So, but do announcements appropriately. So, since, although I've been an intermittent member of the congregation, I guess, with Linda, my wife, was there for 24 years, I guess, right? Since our daughter's first birthday. It's been interesting how the interest has really developed for information about climate, in particular environment in general, of course, but in particular sea level rise. And I guess to some degree because of my work, even I didn't know that Ron had been exposed to it through stopping in here when I talked 6 or 7 years ago. It's a topic of growing interest, and it's changing a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. I'm proud to say that since 2012, my first book, so that 12 or 13 years, it's amazing how the awareness and interest has grown, but there's still a lot of misunderstanding, and unfortunately partly because of politics, partly because of some well-meaning environmental efforts to try and make everything of one flavor, and they're not. The issues of sea level are different than litter, and different than waterways, and different than algae, and a lot of different environmental issues. They're different, just like medical issues are different, and you have to deal with the specifics of your problem to deal with the medical application, and the same is be true for rising sea level as part of climate change, as part of environmental science in general, and part of oceans, but those are not all the same. So, since I've spoken here about each of my books, but somebody asked me if they could buy one. I didn't think to bring any today. I'll try and bring some at a future event. But High Tide and Main Street was the first one, and then Moving to Higher Ground was the second one in 2021. Many of you I know have that. It's just a plain language explanation of rising sea level without any science jargon. That's one thing I'll promise you. You won't be confused, and that's just not my saying it. If you look on Amazon, I make the science simple. Most scientists want to make it a little more complex and use a lot of jargon and technical words. I try and do the opposite. Since many of you probably don't know, I'm the director at Nova Southeastern University, NSU, which is based in Broward but has other campuses. And I'm the director of their Rising Seas Institute, which basically they took over. It was a nonprofit I was running. And because one of their board members went on my trip to Greenland 3 years ago, long story short, they embraced this nonprofit Rising Seas Institute, and I run it, and that's given me a bigger platform. So, whoops. What do I have to do with this? There we go. This is a short video I'm going to start with. It's 3 minutes. It was done from a trip we did in July to Greenland with the president of the university, Dr. Harry Moon, who's a relatively new president at NSU. And his reaction is really worth just showing to you directly without comment. I think he was interested, but I had the sense maybe he was a little bit on the fence about the whole topic, and he's quite articulate here. So if you can, let's run this 3-minute video, and then I'll talk to the science.
Greenland is of critical importance to us all. It is such a special environment. What transpires here will have a direct effect throughout the world.
The seas are rising. The vast majority of potential sea level rise comes from the ice on land on Greenland. The scale of Greenland is such that it holds enough ice to raise global sea level about 7 meters. We have to think about a world where shorelines are shifting. Glaciers melting in Greenland will affect every coastal country. This is a world-changing situation.
Today, we have an opportunity to better understand the changes that are taking place.
The Greenlandic ice sheet, it's huge. About 80% of the island is covered by it.
The Greenland ice sheet is the second largest ice mass in the world, which stretches for hundreds of miles.
The immense panorama is awesome.
So we're noticing lots more meltwater.
Wow, look at that. You can actually see the water flowing into the ice. Down she goes. Wow.
The magnitude of the size was just overwhelming. The power of nature, just incredible.
Coming to Greenland, this is one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had.
This trip has crystallized my appreciation of sea level rise.
It's been a chance for me to see the urgency. These glaciers are going to melt and the water is going to end up in Florida.
It's extraordinary to see the impact. It's like a melt of a continent.
It's the best place to show people the scale of what's at stake here.
It really is impressive.
In Greenland, we can understand what to do to mitigate what is transpiring.
This isn't just about the ocean. This isn't just about glaciers. This is about how can we plan for the future.
So that 3-minute trailer is part of, is a taste of probably a 25-minute show they're going to do that I might even get on television, but they won't know that till they get done with it. But it just, I think, depicts very well what the current state is in Greenland. Most people think of glaciers or icebergs from something they've seen in Alaska or other places, and they're impressive, but they're nothing like the scale of Greenland. I think you get a sense of from the panorama of what you see out of the helicopter there. We can go back to the, there we go, okay. It shows scale reasonably well. However, everything you saw in that video probably is an area of about 100 miles square, and the size of Greenland is about 1,000 miles north-south and 600 miles east-west, and 80% is covered by these the ice sheet, a mile thick. So it really is hard to convey the scale, the immensity of it. Often television cameras distort things by using an angle to make something look bigger, you know, like crowds yesterday or something like that. People would try and distort. This video gives a pretty good opportunity from going from him speaking and then the helicopter rides and the perspective of miles, tens of miles of ice, and yet to realize that that's less than a couple of percent of what's out there. What I can tell you is, having gone there since 2007, almost every year, I mean, and not only what the instruments are seeing, but the measurements of the glacier, but just how the extent of the glaciers in comparison to the villages on Greenland, which have been there for many, many, many generations, is irrefutable. And it's not, there's no distortion, because they're talking about their country, which of course is even a political issue these days. The U.S. has made overtures about, trying to take over Greenland. So there's another whole level of sensitivity. But the fact is, it's a long-term community there. We can tell by the villages and their response. They know where the glaciers have been, and it's changing faster than ever. The rate of sea level rise as the glaciers melt is tripled in the last 30 years, and it's accelerating. So let me show you a couple of slides to that effect, and then be glad to answer any questions. whoops. You know, the simplest picture about sea level that we don't tend to think about, but is look at the perspective of the world. There's four colors. There's blue ocean. There's the white ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland, obviously. And then there's land, which is either brown or green, depending on whether it's vegetation, right? So in four colors, we've got the world. Now, the change factor is the ice sheets. It's the only one, well, vegetation would change with temperature. I guess with warming, we can expect the more green to go to brown. We can expect that too. But the one that is absolutely irrefutable is that in a warmer world, there'll be less ice, the sea will be taller, and if the sea's taller, the coastline is going to be pushed inland, right? It doesn't get any simpler than that. It's the melting point of ice. It's not political. It doesn't care what you believe. What ice melts at 32 degrees, right? Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. This is not a political issue, or should not be. But unfortunately, we are misinformed, and we've let politics get into it, but on top of that, there's just some badly explained science. There are different issues at work here. We can see patterns going back tens of thousands of years. Why is this not? My clicker's not doing anything. There we go, okay. Well, another view of Greenland, of course, Antarctica. Antarctica is 7 times bigger in terms of surface area. Well, actually, volume of ice held, which would translate into sea level rise eventually, but it's slower to melt than Greenland. Greenland's melting much faster. So at the moment, Greenland is the dominant player in terms of where the ice or the seawater is coming from that's raising the coastline, raising the sea level and pushing the coastlines inland. Whoops. Did we skip the Florida one? What's the next one? Is it Florida? There we go. There we go. This is a great slide. If you've seen my talks, you've seen this before, but it's a dramatic slide because it shows the shape of Florida today, which everybody in the world knows just by its distinctive shape. And yet 20,000 years ago, during the last cold spot, when the ice sheets were expanded in their larger mode of the 100,000-year ice age cycle, which I'll talk about in a moment, but 20,000 years ago, Florida was twice the size because sea level was 400 feet lower. It's an extraordinary concept. Just 11,000 or 20,000 years ago, and to the point where I found a beach 200 feet underwater in 1971. That's when sea level was 200 feet lower. So these enormities of sea level change, which change the coastline, they predate our civilization, if you will. I mean, there were human beings around back 11,000 years ago, but we didn't have written records the way we do today, obviously. But it's a very dramatic, it's part of just geologic history. Anybody that is looking for the ancient geology of Florida would come across, whoops, I'm sorry, yeah, there we go. So we see 3 views of Florida, today, 20,000 years ago, and 122,000 years ago. Florida was either twice the size or half the size, depending on what the height of the ocean was. And that has nothing to do with humans. There were humans on Earth, but we were not having the atmospheric impact we are today. So you can see this already undermines a lot of the typical thinking, assuming that we have caused all the melting. The ice age cycles, which nobody disputes, really are the best evidence of the natural climate cycles that Earth goes through. And on top of that, it's human impact. It's not either or. And in this cross-section, these diagrams are all in my book, and it's on my website. We will do a longer program in the winter. But if you look at sea level again from 20,000 years ago on the left, sea level rose in a couple of bumps, not evenly, and then it got to the present level about 6,000 years ago. And if you think about it, if the Christian era is 2,000 years and the Jewish and Chinese calendar are 5,000 years, you can get back to about 6,000 or 8,000 years of written records, maybe a little bit more, so call it 8,000 or 10,000 years. But during that period of time, sea level's been at kind of a peak level. In fact, it kind of flattened out. because it was part of the natural cycle of ice ages. And that's fooled us, because for all of human recorded history, sea level's been pretty stable. And yet, let's see here. Is that a little real? Yes. This is 400,000 years, a bigger time scale. And the blue line is sea level going up and down 400 feet with each ice age by nature. The global temperature goes up and down 9 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius every 100,000 years. That's the natural ice age cycle, not forced by humans. And those two lines go together because when the planet's warmer, there's less ice and the sea is higher, right? And vice versa is true too. During the cooling phases of the 100,000-year ice age cycle, there's 4 ice age cycles here, four cycles at 100,000 years each, roughly. The natural part, again, no dealings of us, has to do with the elliptical orbit of the sun, Earth around the sun. It's called the Milankovitch cycle. It's been known for 100 years. And when the oceans are warmer, they release carbon dioxide. That's why the green line for the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide goes up and down with the temperature, with the red line. So the green goes with the red line. And we would have been entering the slow cooling period to the next ice age 80,000 years from now. But man took over. We are now 8 billion people, changing the atmosphere. And even if we make best efforts to do that, that's still not going to erase all the effects because we've stored heat in the ocean. So I'm going to take the questions in a second because I can see there are some nodding heads and some kind of curious heads, and that's the purpose here. There's a lot to learn, a lot to teach. Thinking that trash pickup and environmental issues from clogged waterways and pesticides and phosphorus in Lake Okeechobee, all of those things are serious. Plastics in the ocean, there's all sorts of serious issues. They are not issues directly related to sea level rise. We need to deal with multiple issues, just what we do in the rest of our lives. But we have to first understand the problem and communicate it, which is what my work is about, and then figure out how to be more sustainable, how to have a lifestyle and a way to do business and power what we need that takes into account how we've changed the planet with 8 billion people, heading to 10 billion. But to realize that sea level rise was going up even without us. And that's kind of the surprising factor to people. And that's not new information. I wrote about it in my first book. So, I mean, it's nothing we've discovered in the last 10 years or anything like that. We've understood that, but the speed of the ice melting on Greenland is what's getting everybody's attention. As Dr. Moon, there, the president of NSU, articulated, he was quite impressed. He went there with an open mind. Just like since I've last talked to this audience, Brett Stevens from the New York Times, some of you, I think, noted this piece. Linda, what was that, 4 years ago, I think? I think Brett, 3? Brett Stevens is a well-known conservative writer from the Wall Street Journal who was hired away by the New York Times. He's a very opinionated, very iconic editorial page writer for the New York Times, and he came to Greenland with me at my invitation 3 years ago, and he was very much on the fence about climate and sea level rise, and he wrote a major expose article of 6,000 words, basically embellishing what Dr. Moon said. They don't know each other, but the scale and the clarity of what's happening in Greenland, which you can corroborate with the local villages and, as well as the recent satellite data, is stunning. And even for skeptics like Dr. Moon, I don't want to put words in his mouth saying skeptic, but somebody, a good inquiring mind, and as Brett Stevens, this editorial page writer of the New York Times, also was on record as thinking that the climate change case had been overstated. And both of them on different trips. I've taken lots of people to Greenland, I mean, senators and military leaders and so on, but to name the two of them, the one you just listened to, and then Brett Stevens, who you can go look up on the Times website, came away realizing, no, this is real. No matter what the environmental causes are, we are now in a new era, and something's happening that is unknown in recent human history. So I think I'll stop there. Again, we will do what I would consider a 45-minute kind of full talk that I would normally do to corporations or military leaders or whoever. But since we're going to try and keep this one short, relatively short, but I do want to answer questions, let me stop there. Questions? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. What was the title of his piece? It'll come to me in a second. Greenland is, no, it's not Greenland is melting. Where are we drawing a blank? But yes, look up Brett Stevens, Greenland, or John Englander. Oh, NSU, Nova Southeastern University. It's also known as Nova, but NSU, I mean, they've got a Nova. They're based in Plantation, but they have a campus in Dania Beach, which is where they give me an office. Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah, there's of course a dynamic, between property development and not only the industry, but people need a place to live, and there's a demand for more and more housing here. And we certainly, we believe that you need to understand the uncertainties, but what could happen. And we're not going to tell you where to build or how to build, but we want you to understand that sometime this century, and actually in the coming decades, sea level is going to rise significantly. Right now I missed this, I didn't cover this, but right now the rate of sea level rise globally is 1/4 of an inch a year, which sounds fairly irrelevant, except it's doubling every decade. And if you double 1/4, you get 1/2, you double 1/2, you get 1, and exponential growth climbs very quickly, just like with the pandemic. It catches us off guard because we think the past predicts the future. But it really doesn't in this case, because the last time sea level's been rising at this rate is like 10,000 years. We have no human history with it. So that's why it's so confusing. Yes? Is the glacier drinkable water, you're saying? Is that the question? Yeah, great question. The glacier water is generally super pure. Now, there are some places where it's got gravel mixed in with it and so on, so you can't drink glacier water necessarily without some filtering. But glacier water is kind of a standard of purity. In fact, some places do bottled water with glacier. Iceland, I think, does glacier water that they export. So the problem is the size of the Greenland glacier is so big. It's like the eastern United States. Literally, it's like from Maine to Miami and almost west to the Mississippi River. I mean, it's just that huge. It's how do you take that much ice, which has an incredible force, and try and direct or capture the outflow of that water is a lot harder than it would seem, okay, just because of the forces. Remember, glaciers sculpted the Great Lakes. They didn't exist 12,000 years ago. Long Island and Cape Cod and places like that, those are all remains of the last glacier retreat 11,000 years ago. Glaciers are not like a stream. They are a force so strong that they sculpt the land, and will, like the Great Lakes are nick marks from when the glacier last retreated. We don't think like that. We have a feeling that's permanent when we look at the Great Lakes. Relatively recent. Yes? Sea level is certainly my specialty, but certainly as the world gets warmer, which it is because of the greenhouse gases, as we referred to earlier, that that trap heat in the atmosphere. That's well documented, well measured. But that had happened before in nature too, 20,000 years ago. So it's putting all these things in plain language and where people can discern them. But we do know that with the current temperature levels, that the ice will continue to melt, but also at the current temperature levels, that it's going to have a big effect on agriculture, on everything from farming to just habitable areas of land where at a certain point when the temperature gets too high, and we're unable to even perspire the heat. There's a wet bulb temperature that we talk about, which is there's a limit to what humans can tolerate, and in some places in the world we're already crossing that threshold. Well, okay. We can apply more technology to try and reduce the greenhouse gases, and but there's a big argument. I mean, the current administration says, "Don't worry about it. We just burn all the fossil fuels," and I stay out of the politics of it, okay, because I really want people to listen, regardless of which party they support. We can slow the warming. That will slow the ice melting and will slow sea level from rising. Okay, that's a true statement. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle and go back to where it was because of the heat that's already stored in the ocean. It would take centuries for us to fully readjust. But again, there was a natural climate cycle of temperature swings of 9 degrees Fahrenheit, average global, but sea level going up and down 400 feet with the ice ages. So the truth is, it's more complex than we would like to believe. Even if we all drive electric cars and have solar panels and windmills and stuff and don't use any fossil fuel, the heat in the ocean is already going to make the melting continue to happen for centuries. And you say, well, that's unfair, it's unfortunate. Well, that's true, perhaps, but if we were born 11,000 years ago, the truth is that was happening even without human impact. So the more we know about this big picture, changes our perspective of the problem and what we can do. It turns out we accept the ice ages, right? The 5-part kids movies, you know, the Ice Age Part 2, The Meltdown. Well, that was a pretty accurate, what? Right. Thanks. Good. I guess I didn't do that. Right. So the red is temperature, the blue is sea level, and the green is carbon dioxide. And those lines go together for some simple physics. But the problem is in the upper right, where the black bars are, that's where we've added carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. That's different than the natural cycle of the ice ages. And it's so dramatic because the line's going straight up. And it's been going up for 200 years since we started burning fossil fuels. So both are true. We need to try and slow the warming because it's going to get to a point where we're cooking ourselves. Some would argue we're already well underway to do that. But we can't go back to some prior state and pretend that we can get back to where we were 200 years ago because the dynamics of the system have changed. For example, the efforts to protect the Everglades, the freshwater river of grass that Marjorie Stone and Douglas wrote about, right? We all think of the Everglades as kind of the natural system. Well, that only can exist as long as sea level's where it is. When sea level was 200 feet lower or when it's 25 feet higher, the freshwater Everglades are different. So we culturally have this myth, and frankly it was inadequate science at the time, to think that there was a natural state we're going back to. Well, that natural state existed for several thousand years, but it wasn't like a permanent level. Does that make sense? So sea level and the coastline change, and they changed by nature, and now again, so because of the warming and the melting ice, sea levels coming up naturally, it's the glaciers melting on land that cause sea level to rise. If we all went to zero fossil fuels tomorrow, the ice is still going to melt for centuries. So it's a lag time. And we need to be aware of both. We need to be aware of the degree to which our energy demanding fossil fuels is warming the planet, but also realize that even if we could magically bring that to zero, we'd be subject to the same ice age cycles, but there'd be an adjustment period because it takes so long. Mr. George? $212, actually, yeah. Yeah. 212 feet, 65 meters. If we melt all the ice on the planet, sea level will be 65 meters higher. 212 feet, sorry. In the last century or two. I mean, it goes back to pretty much the industrial era of it wasn't instant, but it correlates. So your house in Idaho is safe, I guess, right? Yeah. Oh. But your land will always be safe. Contact me, and we're going to do them in July. It's July. It's a 1-week trip in July. Yeah, please get in touch. We're going to announce it in the next week or two, the dates and actual price, but feel free to reach out. Sure. So I have an opinion, but as I indicated earlier, I really go out of my way to not get enmeshed in the political side. There's very important, okay? I don't want to opine on any one person being fired or hired or so on. It's unfortunate that some of the good science from satellites that are providing valuable data are being cut in these budget cuts at the moment. But that's a bigger question. How do we fund government and so on? And I don't want to simplify it. And my MO since I started doing this in 2012 is really to make sure that nobody left the room because of the politics. Okay, I want to have people understand the facts and to see something which is confusing and be able to put it into place. And so I'm just going to sidestep your question. I agree. This is not a meeting about environmental issues. Okay, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. Okay, because that's if you start with all environmental issues, it'd be like going to your doctor and saying, well, I've got a heart problem and a blood problem and a skin problem and so on, and treating them all as if they're one problem. They're not. So we have to look at things more individually. The individual issue here is that sea level goes up and down 400 feet by nature. And right now it should be starting the slow turning point to going down, and it's going up because the ice is melting and there's enough heat in the system that's unstoppable at this point. And we need to understand it and talk to friends and colleagues about it in a way that's honest and sidesteps categorizing it as if all environmental issues are the same, because my contention is that sea level is unique and uniquely powerful because sea level determines the coastline. And the coastline determines whether a piece of land is underwater physically and literally, or underwater in value because the water is getting closer as the ice melts. Real estate is such an important issue or asset and brings in financing, the whole world of finance and banking, investments, that it should stand out as a way to get people's attention. And that's why I try and keep it narrow as opposed to stepping into other environmental issues. Although I certainly have concerns about lots of environmental issues. So back to the sea level and the coastline, and yes, Ron. Yeah. Absolutely. There's, out of the 109, there's 140 nations that border the ocean, that have an ocean boundary. So when sea level is 5 or 10 feet higher, there's 140 nations that will have a coastline that's moved inland somewhat. Some will be submerged already, of the low-lying island nations in the Pacific. We've never faced this before. It's a reality check that two things. One is we didn't realize that we were at the normal turning point and sea level rise was leveling off. We just were ignorant of that. And that the timescales now are different, that things are happening more than 100 times the fastest speed they do in nature. But we're back into we've created this new warming era when by nature we would have been entering a cooling era. So it's a totally confusing situation without historical precedent. I mean, you could liken it to other animal species from wolves in Yellowstone or things that are different, or something in the ecology of the Everglades. But as you say, let's stick with real estate, because real estate is fundamental to the practicality of not only where we live, but where the displaced peoples. The Economist magazine estimates there will be 500 million people displaced by climate change this century. That's something we can't even process that number. And that's a very cautious, very respected publication, The Economist. And yes, and goes with it. There is no panacea. There is no put us in charge and we can fix this. We can understand it better, which is what we're doing literally at this moment. You're learning, and hopefully we'll share this with others. We can understand it. We can work on being more resilient, being prepared for rising waters or more severe storms or heavier rainfall events, or when that happens at a king tide. All the flooding is worse, but flooding recedes. Sea level is the drip filling the bucket that you don't see, but does get worse over time. So we have to understand, we have to be resilient, and then we have to begin to adapt. And again, the last time we adapted to rising waters was 10,000 years ago. So there's no lessons there for us. We didn't have a developed civilization. I mean, it's terrible, but so are so many other things in the world, if you will. We have to look at the positive side. Let's be practical. What can we do for us and our families? It starts with learn the facts, share the information, because most people have a different, don't know what you now know, and confuse things. I've said, so many people say, oh, rising sea level is terrible. We need to get more plastics out of the ocean. I mean, I probably hear that every week, and it doesn't make sense. Plastics has nothing to do with the warming rate or the rate of sea level rise. They're both problems. It's like having different medical problems. Again, you don't go to your doctor and say, I'm sick. Well, you might at first, but pretty soon you've got to narrow down whether that's a heart problem, a lung problem, a skin problem, a cancer, whatever. You have to deal with the problem. And the problem here is that sea level, the last time it got higher, 122,000 years ago, it was 25 feet higher. The last time it was lower was 400 feet lower. Most people are ignorant of that. And that's got to crank into our thinking about where to live, but investments, real estate, banking, all those things. It's an entirely new world, as it is in so many ways. But I would argue that the shoreline and sea level, I mean, one mirrors the other. As the sea level goes up, the shoreline moves inland, right, and vice versa. That one issue is enough to get people's attention because it is real estate, it is where we live, and it's not just the United States or Florida or Boca Raton. It's all over the world, from Hong Kong to Copenhagen. They're facing a very uncertain future. Yes? Yes, there's a couple of different ones. NOAA has one under Digital Globe. There's one called by Climate Central called what? Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, you can look at it. That's right. Right, but here's the catch. You're absolutely right, but here's the problem. Nobody, even me, can't tell you how high sea level will rise the next 30 years or the next 70 years, okay? That's the problem, okay? And no, but it becomes very practical, okay? Because if you say my house is fine for 5 inches of sea level rise and the other flooding factors, but if we're looking at 5 feet, it's entirely different. And you say, when will that happen? We don't know because we don't know how warm the planet's going to get because we don't know how we're going to make our energy and how much greenhouse gas we're going to put in there, trapping heat in the atmosphere. So this is where it becomes incestuous as a problem to analyze, because the fundamental is how high can it get, how soon? That's the real question everyone says, John, how long do I have? I think probably you asked me that question when we met many years ago. It's a natural question. How long do we have living in Boca Raton? A house is 11 feet above sea level. How long before I need to sell my house? That's the question, right? Or how long before the property value gets hurt? That all depends on how quickly sea level rises. That depends on 2 things, Greenland and Antarctica, and how quickly they melt. That is indeterminate, just like you can't predict when the next San Francisco earthquake will happen, or other geotechnical events like tsunamis or avalanches. So that's what makes it particularly difficult. Even I cannot tell you, if you're planning out 30 years, a mortgage cycle, you should allow for a foot of sea level rise, or should it be 2 feet? Interestingly, or surprisingly, or counterintuitively, there is no good answer to that question, because there are unpredictable forces at work because of the size of those glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, and how warm we make the planet, which has to do with energy policy. Nobody knows the answer. Yes? So it decreases the saltiness, good question. As you melt Greenland, the melt water, which is zero salinity, it enters the sea, which is obviously salt water, and it has an effect because fresh water is lighter, and so as all this fresh water enters the North Atlantic from Greenland melting, it changes the forces on the Atlantic current, something called the AMOC that you may read about occasionally, which is related to the Gulf Stream but different. And as the ice in Greenland melts, it's slowing the circulation in the Atlantic of the big conveyor belt they call the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current, the AMOC. You'll see it in print occasionally. And so that conveyor belt of currents in the Atlantic Ocean is changing because of the reducing salinity, which is lighter. If that makes sense. But it's something we can control directly. It's a function of how much ice is melting. We can't go and slow it down. But the warmer we allow the planet to get because of our energy supply, the more ice melts on Greenland, and the more it hastens that slowing of this conveyor belt, which includes the Gulf Stream, which the belief is that if it continues to slow down, and there's new evidence it's slowing down dramatically, that will have a change on ocean currents, will have a change on, a bigger change on weather patterns globally. Yes, the more energy you put in the ocean, generally speaking, the more hurricanes you get. But it's not year to year consistent. We all know that. We can have bad hurricanes, 3 in 1 year and then none for 3 years. That's again because of the complexity of the climate system. You can't do a direct attribution, but you can say that hurricanes are a function of heat energy that's put into the ocean, and we're putting more heat energy into the ocean. Sure. Sure. Fair enough. So, no, so thank you. I'm not saying don't do anything. We need to work to slow the warming. If we don't, it's going to get worse a lot quicker. Two is we got to take a very pragmatic approach and also communicate well and not make people think something will have cause and effect if it won't. But we are entering a new planet. For centuries, you could say that. I mean, from the Industrial Revolution, certainly, but humans are changing our planet. We know that from locally. We know it all over the world. We certainly know it from the glaciers. We have to adapt in a way that gives us flexibility and deals with the unfortunate reality that this is not the way we'd like it to be. But the truth is, nature has never done what we'd like it to do. We've tried to honor nature and live with it. But this is a new planetary situation with 8 billion people headed to 10 billion that are warming the planet. We are going to have to take this into account, not only on our own homes and where we live, but governance of not only nations, but the world. As I say, it's 142 nations that are on the ocean, where rising sea level will push the land boundary inland for centuries. But there's all the other effects, the warmer temperatures, the changing weather patterns, and it's going to be a wild ride, and there's no easy answer. But that applies to so many things, illnesses, warfares, racism, all sorts of things that are going on that we wish were different. We do what we can. But it's got to start from perspective and enlightenment, I think. And that's got to start with good knowledge conveyed clearly and not mingling the topics. In other words, let's not tell people that get plastics out of the water and let's stop the glaciers from melting and implying that there's a correlation. There's not. They're all important, or they're both important in that case. Some very good questions. We could have done this for an hour, I think, and I would have done some other videos as well. But last question from anybody? Some of you. Thank you.